to the show. It's Andrea Gribble, your host of Mastering Social Media for Schools. You're in for a treat. You get to meet the wonderful Erin McCann today. She is the Director of Digital Media and Marketing at Allen ISD, a large school district in Texas. Erin's amazing. She is kind of a podcast expert. She has a lot of experience with a latest bond campaign, and she is committed to professional development and continuing her education. And she knows that, there's a lot to learn out there, and she has just become this sponge. You're really going to enjoy learning from her today. She's going to inspire you in a lot of different ways. And I'm just so excited to lean into this interview. And, if you love learning and are always looking to grow your social media efforts, I put together a one-page social media best practices for schools. I see a lot of schools using social media. Some use it in the right way. Some there's a little bit of room for improvement. And so if you want to check yourself on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, I've put together my best tips for schools on a one-page free PDF, and you can download that for free. The link is there in your show notes. Just make sure to go to that and download it. And maybe you're doing great, and maybe there's a few things that you can pick up for this next school year. But I just want to invite you in to that free resource. So now let's get started with today's interview with Erin McCann. All right, today's K12 PR tip is about back to school time. It is time to be thinking about back to school and celebrating your school in a bigger and better way this school year. You can't do that alone. So, with staff convocation or in service or whatever you call it, when hopefully you have your staff together, make sure to secure 10 minutes of time to talk about the importance of social media and storytelling with your staff. You're going to want to let them know how they can be a storyteller, how they can submit pictures and videos into you. Hopefully you've got an email address that they can send in. You're going to want to show them examples of things that you'd like to get from them. I actually have a whole podcast episode on kicking off the back to school message for your school district in a podcast. So I'm going to link that in the show notes. And I also have a really helpful blog that kind of has a checklist of things that you can go through and cover. So I just want to make sure, let's make this the best year yet of celebrating the great things happening with your school. And it really starts with getting all of your staff involved. And I'm talking about teachers, administrators, paras, bus drivers. All of them can be part of telling your story if you know how to involve them in the right way. And this checklist will help. So make sure that your back to school planning is planning for a time to talk to your staff. Now let's jump into this week's episode with Erin McCann. Welcome to the podcast, Erin McCann.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So Erin and I just met, and but I feel like I know her. Why?
Yep.
Because Erin has a podcast. So it's so good to see you and hear you talk at the same time. Tell folks a little bit about yourself, and then obviously we'll chat a little bit about your podcast as well.
Sure, absolutely. Well, like you said, I feel like I know you too for the very same reason. Like we both kind of move in some of the insper circles in the digital space. And so I was telling you before we started, when I was talking to my partner on the podcast we're going to talk about, I'm like, I think I know her, but I'm pretty sure I haven't met her. And he's like, this is just the job. So anyway, delighted to be here. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so background. So my name is Erin McCann. I'm the Director of Digital Media and Marketing for Allen Independent School District. That's in North Texas. And I, kind of like a lot of people in our industry, I fell into this role. I didn't know that school PR was a job until someone said, hey, I think you'd be really good at this job. So I went to school for broadcast journalism. I went to the Dan Rather School of Communications at Sam Houston State University. That's in Huntsville, Texas. And then when I graduated, I decided about 2 weeks before I graduated that I didn't think I wanted to be a broadcaster. And my dad was like, cool, you're going to graduate, so figure it out. And I fell into teaching. like a lot of our school PR colleagues, I actually started in the classroom. So I taught for 5 years. And then a friend from my home district who became a mentor, Tammy Kirkendall, she's in Highland Park ISD right now. She took me to coffee and she was like, I think you would be really amazing at this. And it took me a few years to actually make the transition, but so glad that I did. And I've been in school PR now for 7 years.
Okay, so what did you teach when you started teaching?
Mhm. I taught kindergarten, which shocks a lot of people when you get to know me because you're like, really? You with the little kids? So listen, they could read, they learned all the academic things they were supposed to, but they all came out talking like me. So I'm not sure that I did them a service, to be totally honest with you. It
Oh,
was fun. I loved my time in the classroom. I loved my kids. It's made me a better parent, to be totally frank with you. I mean, the classroom management piece and learning to give children the choices that they need and it really did help me in my storytelling as well because there is no better storyteller than a 5-year-old child.
Oh, I believe that, but also gave you that perspective now of what your staff goes through on a day in, day out
Right.
basis, right? I mean,
Right.
I guess a kindergarten teacher goes through a little bit different than maybe a high school English teacher, but they all have different struggles. I mean,
Of
you
course.
might be, cleaning up vomit or helping somebody go to the bathroom versus, dealing with other stuff. That's an awesome, just a segue in. And I agree. I never knew school PR was a thing
Right.
because I went to such a small school, Erin,
Right.
300,
Right. Exactly.
300 kids in the school. I didn't know school PR was a thing, but I've realized like school communicators are the best people, the most giving, and I have learned so much. So I'm glad that you've been part of it for 7 years. So tell us about your role then right now as Director of Digital Media and Marketing.
Okay, sure. I joined Allen ISD in March of 2020. So I was on, I know, I'm sure everyone's putting that together. Like, what is wrong with you? I was actually on maternity leave with my son from my previous district, and I had the opportunity to interview in Allen, which is a district I have wanted to work for since I started in this industry. And it all came together. So I actually never returned from maternity leave. And my first day, the day that I signed my paperwork, was the Friday before spring break. So I signed my paperwork and I'm on a little road trip with my family and get a call from my boss. And he's like, hey, so we're going to be extending spring break by a week. And we all know how that kind of rolled out for the next 6 months. So I actually was digital or working from a distance for about 6 months of my job. But anyway, in this role, I serve in a multitude of kind of different spaces, but my technical title is Director of Digital Media and Marketing. So I'm over the marketing plans and kind of how we roll that out in a strategic fashion to the communities that we serve. And then our pieces of collateral that function in a digital space, be that the marketing of our videos. I don't produce our videos, but I do promote them and push them out. Social media, of course. We launched a podcast because that's kind of my sweet spot. So we launched a podcast this school year. And then in addition to that, I do a lot of writing and I just support everything else that my district rolls out. Pretty much anything that our chief communications officer needs and anything that's part of his vision, I help to carry out and work with the communities that we serve.
Awesome. And how big is Allen ISD?
So we are just under 22,000 kids. So
Okay.
we're considered kind of a mid-sized district and we have 25 schools. One
Okay.
high school, though, that's important to note. Any of your listeners that are in Texas, they know Allen. We've got a reputation because we are the largest high school in the state of Texas.
Okay. So, like, how big is just the high school then?
We have about slightly over 5,000 students at the high school, but that's grades 10 through 12. So we do have a separate facility for our freshmen.
Okay. Awesome.
It's a big
Well,
high school.
holy cow. Yes, that is
it's
really
it's
big.
a lot, yeah. We
That's
had
like,
1,755 graduates this year. It's a big school.
wow, that's impressive. Well, I can see why you've probably always had it on your bucket list then, like, hey, I want to be
Yep.
able to work for Allen ISD. And then how big is your communications department?
We have a team of 5. We have a chief communications officer. I am the director of digital media and marketing. We have a web and social media coordinator, a videographer, and then our administrative assistant that keeps all of us in line.
Okay, that's very, very
She's amazing.
that's
Oh, she's the best.
yeah, that's important. Yeah, I think, I don't know if there's a magic formula for how many people in your communications department, and some of you are saying, "What? You got a communications department?" Like
Right.
you're just but like almost one per every 5,000 students, I feel is a pretty good. And so you guys
That makes
got
sense.
5. But I like to make up math equations. That's my
Hey, I like that number. It works for me.
yeah, and I wish every school could definitely have that. All right, so we're going to jump into your journey, and I know you launched a podcast in a pandemic, and we're going to talk about that. But Erin, you're really dedicated to professional development and
Yes.
really continuing to grow. I mean, obviously going broadcast journalism, teaching into school PR, but can you kind of share some of your thoughts? Because I do kind of think of you as Superwoman,
Oh my
and I
gosh.
know everybody. The School PR Happy Hour podcast is an excellent podcast that Erin and her friend
Thank you.
Justin Deering run, and Justin's a friend of mine as well. You had an awesome interview with our friend Kristen Majette,
Yes,
um,
she's the
and
best.
she's the best as well. But I do think you handle a lot. So just kind of talk about that professional development piece in your role and all of that.
Okay. Well, first of all, you're giving me far too much credit. Like you really are, but thank you. Um, Professional development, this might sound a little bit cheesy, but it's honestly a passion of mine. I'm from a family of educators, as many of us are. My father's a physician, and he's also a professor at a medical school. My mother was a teacher. She was later a school board member. And so, education and just continuous learning is something that has been drilled into me my entire life. And so, when I moved into school PR, I was a little bit older than some people coming into the field because I didn't start immediately, and I had kind of the luxury of looking around and going, "There is so much that I don't know," and I already knew that I love to learn, and so I've just made that kind of the cornerstone of my career is that I need to keep learning. There's always somebody who does something different, something new, something better. I find people, usually people I've interviewed with who have told me no, and then I force them to be my friends and my mentors so that I can learn from them because they're incredibly experienced. And so after a few years in the field, I wanted to take my learning to the next level in kind of a more formal manner. And I had the opportunity to be part of cohort 6 for TCU, that's Texas Christian University's Certified Public Communicator Program, which is I believe it's a 13-month course. It's a certification course that's about 90 hours of it's graduate level work, but it's not for credit. And so you learn from these brilliant instructors, and you do everything from crisis communication to roundtable activities. And it was just a really incredible jumping off point into what graduate school might look like. Because frankly, I had really never considered graduate school, mostly because if you knew me as an undergraduate, you're like, she is not cut out for this sort of thing. But I loved it. I absolutely loved the TCU program. And that's a testament to Dr. Jackie Lambiers, who is someone who we kind of see in some of the school PR. She attends our conferences and promotes this. She's just the absolute best. If you can work with Jackie, work with Jackie. But she was very personally supportive, and my boss, David Hicks, was very personally supportive of me continuing my education. And so, with that, I started a master's program last year in August. And so, I'm approximately halfway through. I'm getting my master's of arts in strategic communication, and I absolutely love it. And then I've made no secret of the fact I want to go on and get my APR. I think I want to go on and do a PhD. I've just kind of become obsessed with continuing to learn and continuing to get better. That was a very long answer to your question. I'm sorry.
No, that was perfect. I love it, and I love your commitment, and knowing that there's so much out there to learn. And I don't know about you,
Mhm.
but I went on right after my undergrad, which by the way is in chemistry and business, but I got
Nice.
my MBA right afterwards, and I loved my MBA program because I had
Yep.
already started to work. And so like
Mhm.
everything I was learning, I could apply. And that
Absolutely.
changes
Absolutely.
everything. Um, okay, but you're starting this program, you were still in a pandemic. You
Mhm.
were less than 6 months into your new job, and
Right.
you have a growing family.
Right. Mhm.
So
I'm not well. I'm absolutely crazy.
so how do you do it all? I mean, how do you kinda stay balanced? I know that that fuels you, and I'm like that too. Like,
Mhm.
I sometimes I get so stressed out and I'm like, "Why do I do that?" And to myself, and then I'm like, because that's who you are, and if
Because you love it.
right.
Yeah, you do.
So, what any advice like how to? And you're active. You're really active in T-Spra. You're active in N-Spra. Like,
Well, as you said, I mean, I think it's kind of like when you study introverts and extroverts, and it's just important to know what charges you. This really does charge me. So I hope that doesn't sound like a cop-out answer, but I get energy from these activities, even when I'm tired, even when I'm stressed. So that's part of it. But the other part, and like we all just have to be very real about this, is having a strong network around you, whatever that looks like. If you have a family, if you don't have a family, your work situation. And I'm incredibly fortunate to be surrounded by people who have been nothing but encouraging. I've got parents who are advocates for learning as much as possible. I have a husband who works absolutely insane hours. But every time I'm like, hey, I think I might want to do this thing, he's like, yeah, do it. We'll figure it out. Go do it. And he believes in me, which helps me to believe in me. And then I've got a very supportive work structure as well, where it's kind of like, yeah, I think that would benefit you in the long run. Not that I'm using my work time for school, but it still is very helpful to know that I could go in to my boss and say, hey, I'm studying this concept and I've got this question. What do you think? Or do you think that'd be beneficial? And kind of play off that. Every one of those pieces has contributed to me being able to be successful with all of this advancement.
yeah, and I mean, it's bettering you, but it's bettering yourself for your school district.
Exactly.
It's I always like that quote. What if we train them and they leave, and then it's like, but what if you don't train them and they stay? Like
That's right.
you want your people to fly, and you've obviously went after that. So congratulations, Erin, and
Thank you.
definitely an inspiration there. That it looks like APR is on your horizon at some point, which I know,
At some point.
yeah, is a great program as well. So let's turn our attention to kind of the social media journey. Obviously, you're early
Mhm.
on in Allen ISD, but you've got experiences other places. But at Allen,
Mhm.
if you can share kind of the social media journey that they've been on, or that you've
Mhm.
seen kind of follow over the last several years, just share some insight on that.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, I've been a fan of Allen ISD for quite some time. So I was watching their social media and kind of partnering with the team long before I ever joined, just because I thought that they did things well, but also because I thought it was important to pay attention to how to communicate digitally with such a large community. My previous district, we had about 5,000 kids, and the town itself really only had about 2,000 people. So it was just a very different experience. But I think some of the strategies still sort of play to scale. Um, Joining Allen in the beginning of a pandemic, through a pandemic, I feel like I can really only talk about what I've experienced here and seen here because I don't have that historical knowledge. But with everybody having to be locked down, digital communications became even more important. And everyone was already doing it, but it became our only way to communicate for about half the year. And so initially, we had no content. And I know that wasn't unique to us, that was everyone. There were not kids doing activities, there were not stories being told. So we're like, what on earth are we going to do? People are panicking, people are uncomfortable, no one knows what to expect, and we're like, how do we make it a little lighter? How do we make it a little happier? So we really tried to balance all of the crisis comms that we were pushing out with some other stories that felt relevant. So, for example, we did a Q&A series of videos, and they were honestly just Zoom videos like you and I are doing right now, side by side. And we would interview teachers or students or staff members, and we would make it relevant to what was happening in the pandemic. So one of the interviews that we did was with our culinary arts teacher who also runs our restaurant. Now, obviously, the restaurant was closed, but we're like, kids are home, they have an opportunity to start learning to cook. Like, what are some things that they can do, and how can they make that healthy, and how does that benefit them? So we kind of focused on that social emotional piece with our video series. We talked to the head of counseling. I interviewed a couple of seniors about like what they're doing to keep their minds right, because we didn't know if they, what graduation would look like. So that was kind of how we approached it initially. And then as more information rolled out from both the federal and state government about what schools would actually look like, we just took everything that we could and we shifted it all completely digital since we couldn't really have parents at events for most of the year. And we were super cognizant of the image that we were portraying. So if we got a handful of photos from an activity and there was a kid without a mask, this is when we were under a mask mandate. We're like, well, we can't run this because we've set this as our standard. We want to maintain our standard. We want to maintain that professionalism too.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you be able to, the culinary video especially
Hmm.
interests me with 6 kids and now it's summer
Hmm.
vacation. I need them to be making,
Absolutely.
but let's just link that up because I think,
Of course.
even hopefully next fall it's going to look a lot different and we're going to be back in
Hmm.
school, but I'm sure you learned a lot even from doing those simple Q&A type of videos, that it's powerful and it's engaging and it's a way to bring the school to people wherever they're at.
Absolutely. And I think we've seen too, trending over the last few years, but particularly relevant during lockdown, was not everything that you put out has to be hyper produced and glossy. Certainly, certain things you do, like we had a bond this year. I know we're going to talk about that, but our overall bond video was beautiful and hyper produced. But the raw video, the quick hits, can be just as effective depending on what you're trying to communicate. And that was kind of our plan with those Q&A videos. They didn't have to be fancy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so in the show notes, you guys, is going to be a link to that. Now, what channels for Allen ISD on the district side do
Mhm.
you guys run for social media?
We actually only have three. We have Facebook, which is our longest running with our highest audience. And then we have both Twitter and Instagram are only about 5 years old. So our audience is not quite as large there, but those are our faster growing channels. We have not opened the door to kind of some of the harder to control. We don't have a Snapchat. We don't have a TikTok. We go around in circles. Should we? Shouldn't we? At this point, we only have those three. Well, we also have a YouTube channel. So I stand corrected. We have four.
Okay. And those are the 4 that I always recommend. And, if you have
Mhm.
capacity to do TikTok, awesome. But you know what? You have a lot going on and it's
Yes.
and I think really to do that well, you have to get students involved.
I totally agree.
So that's important. Now, do all of your schools, 25 schools, do all of them have their own social media?
It's not really uniform.
Okay.
So the way we run it, because we are so large, we really just manage those district sites. Now we do have emergency credential login for some of these other accounts just in case, but we don't dip our toes into that water. Now, every campus, I believe, I can check this to be absolutely certain, but every campus has a Twitter
Okay.
and about half of them have an Instagram. That kind of seems to be a campus by campus decision based on their leadership at the time.
Okay. I like that because I mean it with when you have one Facebook page that really tells the district story where you're
Right.
celebrating everything, all your pages aren't competing against each other
That's
to
right.
show up in that news feed. So I actually like that. And if we can, if you've got campuses that are using it correctly and often and things, it can be
Mhm.
great. But sometimes they have a page and it hasn't been updated in 3 months. So it's like, well,
Yep.
that's not really good either. So,
Yeah,
okay,
I'm really passionate about that, like keeping content moving and not having something just for the sake of having it and then producing no content.
yeah, exactly. Awesome. I love that. Great, great advice. Okay, so 2020, yeah, you had it was a record year, but you also had a bond campaign.
We did.
So those are always challenging, but definitely during a pandemic and presidential election, like yikes. So can you kind of tell me about your first, what was your bond question about?
Sure. Okay. So
Okay.
actually, this is, if anyone is listening and you're attending Inspro, we are doing a presentation on this and we'll go so much more in depth. So if you really, really love bonds or you're just kind of trying to find some new ways to communicate with your community, please come out, David, and I would love to talk to you. So there's my plug. But we had a bond out for 222 million, which encompassed everything from campus renovations to new pieces of technology to updating athletic facilities. It was broken out over 4 propositions, which aligned to the Texas legislature law that came out in the previous legislative session. And yeah, it was pretty comprehensive.
Yeah. So 222 million seems like a lot to me, but you're in a bigger district too. So, I mean, obviously you break
We
that
are.
down to what that's going to be. So, how did digital media really play a role in that, in your communication plan?
I mean, it was almost exclusively digital because of the time. I mean, when we started planning, our bond was called, I believe it was July. It was either July or August. Our board called for a bond. That's kind of the terminology that we use here, to be on the November election. So, as you said, competing with the presidential election, it was a it was a record number of people who turned out to the polls, and we kind of knew that might be a possibility. When we started planning for the bond, we really didn't know how quickly the pandemic would start to subside and how realistic it was to do anything in person. So we planned to go fully digital and just kept crossing our fingers that we could do things in person. And as we all saw, it really didn't happen that way. So I think we did about 48 presentations. Only one of those was in person, and that was a request. And the people who attended that presentation, or pardon me, the people who presented that presentation were comfortable. They did wear masks the entire time. All of the other 47 presentations happened via Zoom.
Wow, that's a
Yep.
lot of
Yeah, I mean,
presentations.
we've never done anything like that before. I think people do kind of enjoy video presentations and the freedom it gives them, but then people are a little fatigued by that too. So I think it'll be kind of an interesting study moving forward, as the pandemic has started to subside a little bit, to see what that combination might look like in future, not even just bonds, but just future presentations in general.
Right. Now, it was so comprehensive, and obviously you had these bigger meetings, but you probably broke things down for, social media wise of being able
Mhm.
to share those. So, how did you break those things apart to be able to communicate that as part of the whole?
We knew that we had such a big job to do. We were coming off a failed bond in 2019,
Okay.
so those issues had not been addressed, which was part of this package. We knew that we couldn't physically get out in front of people, and so we went full blitz. We honestly, Andrea, we did everything that we could think of. We hit every medium that we could think of. So I mentioned that we started a podcast this year. That was always in the plan. We dedicated an entire episode to talking about the bond and what it encompassed, how we got there, why that number, why right now. Those were all questions we were getting a lot. And we just thought, right, the people listening to this podcast probably are already getting this information, but what if they aren't? Like, what if we can catch them on a commute? This is a commuting community. A lot of them work in Dallas. That's about a 30 or 40-minute drive. Let's catch them while they're in the car if we can. We did a whole series of videos. We did a large, comprehensive, kind of glossy video that I mentioned, but then we also did more targeted bite-sized videos that were kind of more of a marketing effort. And in that, we showcased different projects in the propositions with kind of quick hits, a minute to 2 minutes at a minute to 2 minutes in length. Talking too quickly there. And so that was everything from an interview with the tennis coach about why the tennis courts were up for renovation, to an elementary principal and what a new campus might look like, or our technology director and what we would be doing with one-to-one devices. In the state of Texas, perhaps nationally, but definitely in the state of Texas, there is a law that says districts cannot advocate for a bond.
Right.
And so we had to be incredibly careful that everything that we produced, every piece of collateral, every digital piece that we put out, nothing was advocating, that it was all purely informative. And I'm really proud of the work that my team put into this, because we were going nonstop for 4 months and it was just all executed incredibly well. We worked very, very hard for this campaign.
So, getting a couple links to those videos would be really helpful
Sure.
too in the show
Absolutely.
notes. So the big question is, what was the result of the bond?
I'm really proud of how hard we worked, and I'm also proud of the way that it turned out. We didn't pass 100% of it since we had to split it into multiple propositions. We knew that was a possibility.
Okay.
2 of our 4 propositions passed, 2 of them did not, but the 2 that passed encompassed 96% of the dollars that were available on the bond.
Awesome.
So we passed, the actual dollar amount escapes me now, but it was 96% of the amount. And so that left us with 2 propositions. Interestingly, if you're tracking this sort of thing, they were both athletic in nature that did not pass, which we actually saw as pretty common across the state. Things
Okay.
that had to do with renovations, immediate campus instruction, technology. Those propositions seem to pass overwhelmingly in Texas, and fine arts and athletics did not overwhelmingly in the state of Texas for that particular election. So I always like to kind of look at those trends and make sure we're at least aligned with what else is happening.
Okay, that's a good perspective. But 96% of what you asked for
Yeah, we're really proud of that.
yeah, absolutely. So just looking back, do you have any kind of things, what worked well, what didn't, just some of your key lessons that you learned?
Yes, we immediately after the election results were canvassed and we knew, okay, this is the final amount. I mean, one of our propositions passed by 18 votes. Like it was tight.
My gosh.
And so we're like, well, we need to be strategic about this, and studying things from a strategic perspective is a passion of mine. So we walked through the RPI. Well, we were doing the RPI method the whole time. I mean, we did our research on the front end. And so I was like, right, we have to evaluate. So we went right back out to the community and we did a survey to gather more information, to get feedback. And a lot of it was really, really helpful. I mean, people said, I just don't feel like we should be doing athletic events during a pandemic. Like that's not necessarily our sentiment. It's not necessarily not our sentiment. It's not our job to formulate that opinion, but we need to know what the community thinks because it helps us to evaluate any future decisions. And so we did, I would say like that was the lesson learned was what we did, which was decide to be evaluative immediately to make sure that we could do anything else that we did moving forward was coming from the right, most efficient way to work.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. That's helpful. And it's a lot of work,
It's a lot of work, but it's worth it. It's good work.
but don't get mad or celebrate the win because it was a
Mhm,
very slight win. But you went right back to getting information, which is going to help you going forward. So,
mhm.
um, you and we're already going into our time, Erin, because it's I knew we'd have a lot of fun talking.
I'm talkative.
No, and so am I. So, but I do want to ask a little bit about the podcast because
Of course.
you do a podcast, and we're going to make sure that the School PR Happy Hour is an awesome podcast to listen to for
Thank you.
school communicators. But you actually started a podcast in your school. You
Mhm.
talked about having one episode dedicated. So, like, what's your podcast called? How often are you recording it?
Mhm.
What's the story there?
So it's called Allen Voices,
Okay.
and we do one episode a month during the duration of the school year. So we're on hiatus right now, planning for season two. And that was intentional because we have so many other projects. We wanted them to be meaty episodes rather than just trying to be too frequent. It just didn't work. I'm really the only one working on the podcast for the most part, so needed to balance that. But our district, like so many of our districts, has these incredible offerings and stories to tell that don't necessarily make it out for a multitude of reasons. And so it was just another tactic to tell the stories of the incredible things happening in our schools. And so this year, we really focused on highlighting different aspects and different programs that we weren't necessarily highlighting in other ways. So I did a whole episode on our CTE offerings. It's such a robust program here. I really foresee myself doing even deeper dive on some of the CTE offerings.
And CTE stands for Career and Technical?
Sorry, career technical education,
Okay.
yes, which is a huge part of education in Texas. And we've just got some, I mean, I could do a whole episode talking about what we do for CTE in Allen. It's just out of this world amazing. We did another episode on kind of the transitions between like our elementary kids moving up to middle school, our middle school kids moving to our freshman center, freshman to high school, and how we support those transitions. Really anything that we could think of that parents might want to know. We're really trying to look at it from a parent perspective on this one.
Okay. That's great. And so I started this podcast during the pandemic, and because it was like
Mhm.
my COVID project, I was
Right.
scared of starting a podcast for years. I'd always wanted to, but I was scared. And I took one weekend and I watched some training and I figured it
Uh-huh.
out. And it's like, it's not as hard as you think.
No.
Would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree with that, and I also think it's a very natural way to communicate. Even though I trained in broadcast, I'm more comfortable behind a microphone than I am in front of a TV because I feel like I have one of those resting faces where people are like, why is she mad all the time? I'm like, no, I'm not mad. I just look like that. So it's like behind the microphone. Behind the microphone, you can relax a little bit and you can really focus on telling that story. Now, I know a lot of people don't hyper edit their podcasts. I really do. I want it to sound professional. I take out a lot of the filler words. I look at it like, is there anything that my guest said that they wish they maybe hadn't, like they kind of got a little too comfortable? I cut that out. Like I want everyone to walk away from being a guest on any of the 3 shows that I work on. I want them to walk away just feeling really proud and not like, oh, I wish I hadn't said that and it was recorded.
Right. Yeah. And then that can end up taking a little bit more time. So you mentioned you
Mhm.
do 3 podcasts. So what are
I
those?
do.
We'll make sure to link to all of those.
Oh, thank you. That's so generous. Well, Allen Voices for work, and then for about 4 years, my cousins and I have this very fun, very casual podcast called "Salt Over Your Shoulder," where we cover superstition and urban legends. It's nothing but a project for fun. It has no real purpose. We don't really market it. It was an excuse to spend time together, and this is where I learned to podcast. And then, of course, like my favorite one that I work on is my show with Justin that is for school PR professionals. It's called School PR Happy Hour. That one runs twice a month during the school year. And we just obsess about professional development. That's really, if I had to sum it up in a nutshell, that's really what it's about.
Yeah, and bringing people together especially when you can't
Hmm.
be together in person, although we will be in
We will
in
be so
July.
soon.
So that is good. As we wrap up, obviously this show is all about social media and we talked about that, but what would be your best social media tip?
For our audience in Allen, and I found this even like with my personal social feeds, if you vanish for a little while, they've lost interest in you. And so consistency in creation of content and a consistent voice have really been such a mainstay for me in both my professional and my personal
Okay.
social media work.
Yeah, that's great advice. Consistency and that consistency in voice. Um,
Hmm.
you know, um, so I'm going to put you on the spot, Erin, because this is one
Okay.
question that I kind of wanted to ask people. You may or may not want to answer this, but
Uh-oh.
we're real. And so,
Hmm.
can you think of one of your biggest social media mistakes that you've made?
Absolutely, yes, and I'm privileged to say that it's not in the district that I currently work in, so I
Okay.
don't mind sharing this. Um, my a different district that I worked in, I'm not gonna call out who it was. I didn't have a team. It was just me, and mistakes happen. Mistakes absolutely happen, and especially on social media when you have so many eyes. And so I was at a conference. I was actually at a professional development conference, and I got a call from a principal. An issue had happened. They needed to release something. Can you please write this? And I'm like, okay, absolutely. This is my job. I will. So I stepped out, wrote it, didn't take a close enough look at it, and sent it off. And so that was the mistake. And that's something that I think you can't have enough eyes on things. Now, luckily, it ended up being a really silly mistake. I said upmost instead of utmost, and it was the wrong grammatical word. So it wasn't anything that crushed anyone's reputation, but man, that community that day just decided to go to town on my grammatical mistake. And I'm like, oh, I should have asked somebody else, like just run it through Grammarly, ask someone else to look at it. And so that's been a huge learning point for me is that when I get stressed, I move too quickly. And when I move too quickly, that's when I make mistakes. And so slow down, get another set of eyes, get 5 more sets of eyes. Here in Allen, I'm forever running around with my computer. Hey, will you look at this before I post this? Hey, will you look at this? I'm sure I'm driving everyone crazy.
Yeah, but it's good advice. I know I've had a lot of them doing social media for so many years for so many different schools. But like just recently, graduation was on May 28th, and I said March 28th. And
Right.
so and then somebody's like, "Don't you mean May 28th?" And I'm like, "Great catch. We corrected it." And we just like I
Right.
left it in there but when I first started, that would have crushed me. I'd been like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna get
Absolutely.
fired. Somebody's got the wrong date."
Absolutely.
But you just really have to think. And I actually have a note next to my desk. It's stop, pause. You got to
Love it.
think it through, and then you actually do it, right? So you just kind of, because social media, like, you're out there for everybody to see.
Forever.
But
Mhm.
I just thought, that's kind of a helpful question, because people are like, I mean, Erin, she's got it together. She's perfect. No, we all make
No.
mistakes. So
Oh my gosh, I make mistakes every single day. I
yeah,
just try to keep them off social media when I can.
yes, it's a struggle. But well, thank you so much, Erin. What is the best way to stay connected to you if folks are meeting you for the first time and want to stay
Sure.
connected?
I think probably professionally, I use Twitter the most, and so my handle is at McErin. That's MCERIN 2006. I am on all the platforms, and I never mind connecting. But as far as my kind of connection and interaction with school PR folks, that's really where most of it tends to take place is Twitter. But I would love to hear from people. You can shoot me an email anytime. It's Erin, Erin dot McCann, MCCANN, at Allen ISD dot org. I think if we're .org, probably should have checked that out before I said it out loud.
Well,
But I love connecting with people.
yeah, and I'll put your email in the
Thank
show
you.
notes as well. So you guys just go to the show notes, and check it out, because we're going to share a lot of what we chatted about, the Q&A series, the culinary interview, kind of the rawness of that. We'll share
Mhm.
some of the videos from the bond campaign, and then definitely check out Erin's podcast, Salt Over Your Shoulder. That's gonna be one of my
It's fun.
running podcasts.
Oh, thanks.
I think that would be fun. But so nice meeting you, Erin. Thanks for giving
You
back.
as well.
Thanks for what you do for your school, but what you do for the entire school PR community, because it's amazing, and I'm so thankful for your time today.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. I really do. Thank you.
Yeah,
And thanks for asking me to be on your show.
you bet. Thank you guys for listening in. We'll see you next week. Bye bye.